Good morning and welcome to the Comic Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of January 2021. We made it. We're out of 2020. Thank God. Thank God. We've got a great book for you this month by a great creative team. Reckless and two people who really don't really need much of an introduction at all. Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, who are here with us. They're with us? No, they're not with us. There you go. Thanks, Jordan. Professional show business. Another great book from these guys. You guys are such an amazing creative team. You've worked together like for so long on so many books. Yeah. It's kind of crazy.
Hey. Perfect amount of time.
Yeah.
We're halfway there, Sean. We're halfway there.
I love it. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the collaboration in a bit. But my first question is always my first question. I love this question. Why comics? Of all the things that you can be doing, what is it about comics that speaks to you, that makes you thrilled, that energizes you? You know, you both obviously have a lot of talent. You could be doing anything you want to at this point. Why are you doing comics? Sean, you start.
I don't know. It's what I love the best, you know. I could do something else, but I've never tried to. I started doing comics really young, and I just never really wanted to get out of it, you know. So I'm still here. We can do whatever we like, so it'd be stupid to do something else.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Yeah.
Ed?
I never thought about it as a choice. Like, I just grew up with comics. I was reading comics before I actually could read. Like, I was reading like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and even like old EC comics and stuff when I was like 2 or 3. I remember my dad brought home just these stacks of comics from his friends at the office. And so I think I feel like comics is almost like my first language. Like, I could speak English, but I couldn't read it. But I was reading the stories in these comics and sort of following them without even really understanding what people were saying or thinking. And it just feels like just a big part of my life. Like, I never have ever considered quitting comics. Like, I know I had a lot of friends in the 80s and 90s when I was breaking in who would always talk about quitting comics. And a lot of them did end up quitting comics and went on to more lucrative careers sometimes. I never even thought about it.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
you guys
never really wanted to do anything else.
Yeah.
It's different here in the UK anyway. There isn't that much other stuff. You know, I can't go work in Hollywood because I'm 6,000 miles away. And when I started, computer games hadn't been invented, so I couldn't do that then. And now I'm just too old, I think.
Yeah.
Britain's got a pretty good film industry, I thought. You have your own award.
Yeah, I mean, I know people that do comics and work in film. You know, especially like things like Star Wars gets shot over here and stuff like that. But no, I like comics, especially the ones I do with Ed, because we get our names really big on the cover. You know? You're like one of 5,000 little names zooming past. You know, I've got too much of an ego to give that up, I think.
Thanks to in the end credits that like 3 people on Twitter will scream about later.
Yeah.
I can't remember some friend of mine was saying we won't really be successful until our names are bigger than the name of whatever the project is on the cover.
You know, it's interesting. You guys are actually one of the few creative teams that I almost think that you could put out something called, you know, Sean and Ed Comics and Stories, and it would surpass the criminal, reckless, scene the crime, whatever. You know, you could just be an all-encompassing anthology comic or something.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, if we put the word anthology,
my name goes first. Yeah.
Yeah, if we put the word anthology in the solicitation, it would immediately not sell for some reason.
Well, that's true.
But yeah, I do feel like the one thing. I mean, I don't know exactly how we did it or why we did it. We just continued to do books together from the beginning. We just liked working together, and we both, you know, are pretty prolific. I think a lot of our you know, productivity is down to Sean just always wanting more pages and me just thinking. I remember early on there were other writers who were trying to get Sean for projects all the time, And so I knew if I ever like left him hanging waiting for pages, that the potential of losing him to like Joe Casey or somebody. So I always just kept it moving forward, and then it always gave me like new ideas, like ideas for stories I might not have come up with had I not known that oh well, we have these deadlines. And then it just became a thing where it's been like 20 years of us just doing comics together. And I don't think we have the record. I think Sergio and Mark Evanier will always have the record with Gru.
Yeah.
But he can draw an entire issue of Gru in like an afternoon. So that's barely.
Well, they also, they take multiple years off at a time too. So
that's true. Yeah. Yeah, we've been pretty much doing like 10 to 12 comics a year or 2 graphic novels a year. This has been our really
15 years or so for that.
Yeah.
That's nuts. So let's talk about your starts in comics a little bit and how you got to this place. Sean, if I can believe Wikipedia, and I may not be able to believe Wikipedia, you were doing comics when you were 15 years old.
I was, yeah.
How does a high school, what would be a high school student here, even have the stones to submit work? Do you know what I mean? Like I kind of don't understand how that could come about.
Well, I didn't submit. Well, the first thing I ever had published, I was 12.
Wow.
Me and a friend did a comic strip, and we went to our local newspaper, and they published it. And we did that when I was 12. And then when I was 13 or so, there was this class at my school for an adult education class in the evenings for how to draw comics. And me and a friend went along because we were mad into comics, and even though we weren't adults, we got permission to go. And the guy who ran that class, a guy called Ken Houghton, drew for British Comics at the time. And one of the reasons he did the class was to find new talent. And he sort of trained me up, I suppose, over a couple of years, weaned me away from wanting to draw Spider-Man and Conan, which is all I was really interested in, and get me to draw stuff that would be saleable in for the comics that he worked for. So he was drawing for girls' comics. There used to be dozens of anthology comics every week in the UK. Humour comics, comics aimed at everybody, comics aimed just at boys, just at girls, war comics, sport comics. And he mostly did girls' comics. And so there'd be stories about schoolgirls and their boyfriend trouble, or Victorian orphans, or gymnasts, or girls and their horses, and stuff like that. And by the time I was 15, he thought I was good enough to give a chance to. So the first 2 or 3 years, all the work was stuff that he'd got, and I ghost penciled for him for a couple of years.
Yeah.
He would then come and ink it and save it, and correct it and stuff. But none of that stuff ever had credits. There was never any credits in British Comics then, so it didn't really matter, So he just sort of got me trained up and got me sort of interested in drawing other things rather than just superheroes. Yeah. So that's how I learned to draw, someone walking down the street or having a conversation. Stood me in good stead for the stuff Ed and I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
I never thought it'd be a real job. It was always something I did, because I was still at school. I just did it in the weekends or the evenings, and it was just sort of like pocket money. I spent all my money on records and comic books. So, it wasn't, and I still went to art college thinking I'd be a designer or a more general illustrator. Comics was always sort of like, it never felt like it could be a real job, even though I knew this guy Ken who did do it as a real job. But it always seemed impossible to break out of that little ghetto of British comics and go further. To like work for Marvel, say, or whatever. That just seemed like an impossible thing to do.
Yeah.
And it was a lot harder back then, because before the internet.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, like what did it pay like a page? Because I'm assuming that Ken was paying you smaller than what he was getting.
Yeah,
I'm assuming, right?
Well, this was like 1980 when I started.
Yeah.
So I was getting about £20 a page.
Okay.
Which would be, back then would have been, I don't know, $30 a page maybe.
Right.
But that was loads of money. A record cost £4, so I could buy 5 records for every page I drew. So fine, that was plenty.
Yeah. Interesting.
Wow.
That's utterly fascinating to me. The page that we found on your website,
Yeah.
I think identifiably has your style to it. I mean, your layouts at least. Even then, when you were 15 years old.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, yeah, that one there, that's my pencils and Ken's inks.
Yeah.
And he drew the first episode of the story, and we did about, I don't know, 15 episodes, maybe 3 pages at a time. And I was purposely trying to draw like Ken.
Yeah.
We made it more like him, obviously.
I love the fact that this is issue number 1287 of Bunty.
Yeah, well, it's a weekly comic. It was a weekly comic. It's been going since the 40s, probably.
Yeah.
They've all gone now. All those comics have gone. The only thing left is the Beano, which has been going since like 1938 or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's
even with the strong newsstand in America, I mean, we never had girls comics that lasted like that were published in that kind of a way. It's kind of amazing, actually.
Yeah, I think Bunty lasted for 50 years, maybe 40, 50 years. It was still going in the 90s. It was dying out definitely even by the time I started, it was a lot less than it was 10 years previously.
But its last 25 years just slowly dying out.
Yeah, there hasn't been anything for 25 years probably.
Yeah. Wow.
2000 AD is the only thing left, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's from what I've been hearing from a number of the stores, there may need to be a revival of the British local comics industry because Brexit is apparently really messed up, like the ability product into stores now. It kind of catastrophically. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
All those idiots that voted for it.
Yeah. Very cool. Ed, your first comic. We found this one too. We found the art for this one.
Oh no!
Comic Chronicles.
No, I'm not seeing that one.
Fields, an alligator in a dress, and a 1980s punk rocker on a raft in space. Dude,
I never get fun things like that to draw.
I don't even remember any of that. That was not actually my first comic either. Before that came about in a weird way. I used to do these like small mini comics with some friends of mine in San Diego, where I sort of grew up after my dad got out of the Navy. And I worked at a bunch of different comic stores there. And when I first started, I wanted to be a cartoonist. I wanted to write. I only started writing stories because initially I wanted to draw like Spider-Man or something when I was a little kid. And then as I got older, I discovered like Undergrounds and stuff like American Splendor and Reed Fleming, and me and my friends were all into that. And so we would do our own little mini comics and just give them out at Comic-Con to people. And I met a lot of people that way. And one of the people I met, I think, did a Gumby comic for Blackthorn, and they introduced us to the people over there who were looking for like parody comics. And so I had this weird idea for a comic that was sort of going to be a parody of Gilligan's Island. The sad thing is we actually sold a lot of copies of that comic, and I never got paid for it.
Wow. At all?
I don't believe I ever got a dime for that, but it sold. It was like during the black and white boom, and Blackthorn was like pumping out. I think we sold like 15,000 copies of that or something ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure no one ever bought one. They're just all sitting in boxes and some, or they're in the landfill more likely. But yeah, that was like when I was like late teens, I think. I was doing that stuff like as a teenager. I started doing like zines and mini comics in high school, and really just, like my goal was just to write and draw my own comics. And probably until my like mid 20s, I was just trying to write and draw my own comics, and I was really slow and just unhappy with my own art and just agonizing over stuff all the time. And then I started having friends ask me to write comics for them to draw, and that was so much. It was like a huge explosion of creativity, because suddenly there were people who could draw things I didn't know how to draw very well, like cars or action or clothing folds. I could draw things that looked basically like an Archie comic.
Yeah, no, I remember back in that day, because you go for a while there, and I
used to hang out at your store all the time.
Exactly. and complain about making comics. Oh, nobody liked my comics.
I know. I gotta say,
I got more copies of my comics, Brian.
Yeah, When I saw the rack of my books behind your head, I just thought I would have killed for that shelf space 25 years ago.
Dude, more like 32 years ago, my friend.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Oh man. Cool.
Yeah, I used to spend every Friday afternoon, I think, or for a while at your store.
Yeah.
Like just with a weird little crew of people that would always just kind of drift in and out, go in and out of the back room, argue about the craziest comic nerd moments I think I've had probably were in your store.
Yeah. Well, that
still one of the most fun arguments
ever. To have a clubhouse, right? You know?
Yeah, it totally was. It was like a clubhouse. It was funny because people would go there for the parties during Comic-Con, but I would at the various like Bay Area Comic-Cons, but I'm like, you go here every Friday and it's basically like this, but with just like way less people and way less noise. You still get like 10 people to argue about whether Captain Kirk can beat up Batman.
Right.
Which I believe you just definitively proved he could.
The shoulder roll, man. It's the shoulder roll.
Yeah.
Do you I'm curious, Ed, if you think that that your time cartooning made you a better writer of comics.
I do. I mean, yeah, I guess so. I think more in terms of the page and the panel composition, I think, than sometimes I'll see. It really depends. If people grew up wanting to be a comic book writer and really just studied comics, they probably have the same kind of visual shorthand that I might have. But I've always been told by writers that my scripts are really easy for them to see what I'm asking for. And I don't give them, I don't drop like an Alan Moore, like page and a half panel description. I pretty much will have like one. I write comics for other people. I mean, for Sean, my scripts for him are basically the same as the way I used to write scripts for myself. Just exactly what he needs to know, some emotional intent for the character, and then the dialogue and the narration or whatever. But yeah, I definitely think, like I said, comics is like one of my first languages, and I just think in terms of like visual storytelling that way. And so I still think, when I'm writing the panels, if I write a panel and I write a description and I'm like, I have no idea how anyone would draw that. It's rare that I would actually leave that on the page and just decide, I'll let Sean figure it out.
Yeah.
One of
those stuff is really easy to figure out what to do. As soon as I read the script, I know exactly how to lay that out. And you never ask for anything impossible. You never ask for like more than one action in one panel, which I've worked with other writers that don't do many comics and they do novels or other stuff, and they ask for impossible things because they're not used to having to break it down into very simple.
Yeah. I think in terms of the beat, so much of my philosophy of writing comics too just works. I mean, like the way Sean and I tell a story, I think it's like we're each doing a completely different thing that meshes together well. But like one of my biggest obsessions with comics as a reader and as a creator is about the flow through the story and how you're trying to control the pace that the reader is reading it at so that you can have these moments have impact. And, I used to not ever do splash pages. And in the last 5 or 6 years, we've started doing splash pages because I realized I could find a way to sort of slow the story down at that moment and have like a really mundane splash page of like a guy standing, like Ricky Lawless standing in a room, looking down at a bunch of unopened mail can have like impact if it's given that kind of a beat. And I really think about the pacing and the sort of rhythm of the story as much as anything. So if that answers a question.
Yeah, no, I always find the approach, like everybody has a kind of a different approach about how they break down a page or how they think about it. And the process stuff fascinates me endlessly. I see it sometimes. Every now and then someone thinking that they've just discovered the show don't tell rule, I guess, will point out that I often will be using the narration to basically say something that Sean is also drawing, like a similar thing. And I'm like, yeah, but if you're reading all the narration on that scene,
the narration itself has a rhythm and is telling you a story, and the pictures are sometimes doing the same thing and sometimes showing something else. Or it's like, I think, I always think comics are words and pictures, and a lot of times people don't understand that show don't tell. Like, you can show don't tell in a book that is only just words. Like, you can show with words, you can tell with pictures. Like, I think people just sort of, how it is, like with critics, sometimes people just kind of learn like a few different phrases and they throw them off a lot. And I always, like, whenever I see something like that, I always, for a second, I look at it and I'm thinking, did I do that? Should I have done something different? And then I think, well, in the moment, I'm always just trying to lead people through the story. I do so much of it just by instinct at this point. And there's the trust of, working with Sean and knowing that the story will make sense.
What kind of, so you said that the scripts that you give to him are similar to what you would write for yourself. Is it still panel by panel breakdowns, or is it just sort of here's what's happening on the page, or?
It's panel by panel, but it's not, I think Ed means that he doesn't give me any.
Yeah, there's nothing extraneous.
He'll never say this is a close up looking over, looking at this, or sometimes.
Yeah, like this is my notebook. Like I'll have this sitting next to me.
I never see that stuff.
Yeah, Sean never sees that stuff.
No.
And I'll have that sitting next to me when I type. And then, but I type like panel 1, description, and then it's like panel by panel. It's exactly the same as I wrote for like Marvel or DC format wise. But just because it's him, it's like there's never a page script that goes longer than a page of typing. Yeah. Like, if occasionally there's one that's close, if there's a lot of dialogue or something, but I never feel like, I'm working with only 2 artists right now. I'm working with Sean and Marcos Martin. And like, even with Marcos, the first issue, I gave him a lot more information than I would have given Sean. We were, creating a whole new world and everything. But by halfway through the second issue, I had like a sense of how much he actually needed. And he's such a pro, and I've worked with him before.
That's it. You just tell me what I need to know.
Yeah, you tell someone what they need to know. You don't want to overload them with, you see those Alan Moore scripts, and when I was a kid, I was impressed but also daunted. But then I remember talking to Dave Gibbons, and he would talk about just going through and highlighting the 4 things he needed to know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you get that script page from him, Sean,
yeah,
what's your first step?
Well, as I read it the first time, I can totally see it in my head straight away. Give us a second.
Yeah, no problems.
Oh,
this is what I do.
Oh.
I make a book for every story we do. So I knew that this is the next Reckless book. So I knew it was going to be 150 pages. So I get a book printed, and it's got it's got blank pages in. We've just got a grid. Can you see that? It's a bit bright, isn't it?
I can't, but I understand.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, I see it there.
So that, because all that stuff is on 3 tiers.
Yeah.
Almost always. And then I thumbnail it like this. And that tells me everything I need to know. But the first thing I do is I put in the lettering. And then whatever space is left is what I draw in. So
that one looks like testicles.
It's good that I let my own stuff, because I can control it and know that everything's going to flow together properly.
That's fascinating. So you're literally printing a book, or do you have blank books printed up, or you're printing a book individually?
It's print on demand, just one copy made.
Okay.
Of this, because I've usually already done the cover before we start on the interiors, so it gives me a week to get the book printed. It's just something nice for me. I like to have.
No, I love this. I love that.
I've always done my thumbnails in a sketchbook, so I've got thumbnails going back 35 years.
Yeah.
So it's just I like to keep everything. And we
I
can
was
stick it
gonna
back.
say-
That's crazy. I love. I mean, not crazy in a bad way. I love this. This is probably close to my 200th interview with a cartoonist, and you're the first one who's ever done it like that. And I love that. I adore that. That's really cool.
I've not done it. I've only been making the books since we started the Fade Out, and then I suddenly realised I could do it. and it just seems like the easy way to do it. It's good because most of the stuff Ed and I do, we know how long it's going to be before we start, usually, don't we, Ed?
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially nowadays when it's original graphic novel. But there's an extra 40, 50 pages in the back just in case we go long.
Yeah.
But, if it's usually a book would be a trade's worth with a few extra pages in the back, and then I can, fit it in.
Yeah.
It just keeps it organized for me.
I was going to show you. This is how my script page actually looks when I send it to Sean.
Well, that first panel's got a lot of description because it's the first time we see that character, but usually there'd be half that.
Yeah, exactly.
But we can see the later panels are just they're one.
Yeah, here's the pencil. Here's the pencil.
One sentence.
Yeah. But that's about standard for the amount of detail I put in for Sean at this point. It's a lot of it is talking about the emotional impact on the character of the moment, or what their facial expression is, or what they're doing with their hands. Like, all my characters smoke way too much because it's like, otherwise they're just standing there.
Yeah. Can't all your characters have their hands in their pockets next time?
No. You draw hands way too well. Hands are the hardest part. You can always tell an artist's working if they're drawing hands.
Yeah.
Hands in the fronts of people's bodies. If you get those pages where it's just all people from behind and their hands are in their pockets, they're on deadline.
Yeah. Well, the last few pages of this book then, yeah.
No!
So it looked to me, Sean, from that glance that we got of your thumbnail book, that that your thumbnails, you're just basically blocking out space.
Yeah. Pure staging, I suppose.
The staging,
Because I shoot photograph for everything.
Oh.
So this is all I need for me to then go and shoot the photos. So like most of those panels would be just pictures. I'd take photos of myself acting out the different characters. Stuff like this. Where is it? That panel there. I might go and find some reference online. Yeah. There's lots of pictures of people having sex on the internet apparently, so that's quite easy to find. Stuff like that. And this is all I need. And once I shoot my photograph, then I can edit that and fine tune it. But if you compare this to the finished page, everything that's in the finished page is already here.
Yeah. The composition's really close.
Yeah, because like I say, as soon as I read your script, it just pops into my head how it should be. I very rarely change it. There's hardly ever any time when I might do a second pass on something. Some of the pages have got a bit of white out on them where I've changed my mind, but very, very, very rarely.
And it looks like you're doing the thumbnails maybe with a Sharpie or something?
The panel border's a Sharpie, I think, and then the rest is just whatever pen I happen to have lying around.
Okay.
But it's not about the drawing. It's purely about staging and organising everything. So I know what I need next. So like photos of myself or photos I find online, stuff with backgrounds of cars or, whatever else Ed gives me to draw.
Yeah.
Hard stuff, mostly.
And are you literally taking photos of every panel?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Wow. That seems like that would be really time consuming.
It is, but I didn't learn to draw, so I've got to do it. If I'd learned to draw 30 years ago, I would never have to pick up a camera, would I?
But the difference between the way Sean,
I wouldn't do it if I was doing a superhero book, because I'm not quite built like a superhero. Yeah. So there'd be a lot of work. But because like Ed says, folds in clothing and stuff like that, that's the stuff that is really hard to do out of your head.
Yeah. It's more of like the way I think of what Sean does, because there are a lot of artists who are incredibly reliant on photo reference, and you look at their work and that's all you see, and it's got like a real stiffness to it. Mm-hmm. Like the way Sean does it, it's not really like that. It's more like it's like an underlayer, and then he does because he started out. He does more penciling now than he used to.
Yeah.
But Sean has always done the majority of the drawing and the actual inking, and which is why I think, because a lot of photo referencey artists, I can't empathize with their characters at all. But with Sean's stuff, I always feel like there's a huge amount of empathy for all the main characters. He really nails facial expressions and makes you really care about. And a lot of times when people do photo reference, like it's all panels where people are going like, you know, it's like these extreme moments, and it's like, well, gesture, do something, like, you know, it doesn't feel like real. Whereas Sean's stuff, it just has like he uses it to sort of add like a weight beneath the actual cartooning.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes
the artwork,
the figure work the photo ref is quite heavily pantomimed and exaggerated. But then a lot of the reason I use the photos is for the subtlety you get, you know, because a lot of it is, you know, very subtle in what the characters are thinking, and I want to try and make it look like you can see what they are thinking and what's going on in their heads, and that makes it so much easier if I'm acting it out in front of a camera. I hardly ever use anybody else as a model because it's really difficult to explain to them what I want. It's much easier for me to do it by myself, and also I'm in a room by myself. I don't get embarrassed doing it. But if I was in front of someone else or someone else in front of me was doing it, then it sort of, there's a barrier then, but we don't have that. And obviously, you know, no one sees the photos.
Yeah.
Ever anyway. You know.
And nowadays, because the internet and everything is so easy, like every now and then, if there's like a really weird scene or like like something I've never written before that I have like a picture of it in my head, I'll search for like 5 or 10 different images of like a guy swinging a sword from a specific angle and I'll send Sean a bunch of different images as like something like this is basically what I'm trying to describe here badly. Because if you just say he hits him with a sword, there's like, you know, he could choose 100 different ways to do that and all be right. But one is like the one that's sort of in my head, like that image where in the book where he's like blocking the sword, the machete, the hatchet.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I used the photo you sent me for that. I used that, but I shot my own photos.
Yeah.
In a similar pose, you know, so it matched the rest. But I mean, like things like I have to use photos for all the backgrounds and cars and stuff because I'm in England and everything that I draw is set in America. It all looks, you know, it could be on Mars for all I know. You know. Yeah,
and after the fade out, I realized too.
Like, the fade out isn't any more difficult than contemporary US stuff because it's all alien to me.
Yeah, but as a writer, it's so much better to write stuff that took place before cell phones. So now I'm like, 80s LA. That's great.
Yeah,
If you can find reference for it everywhere. I mean, you can go on YouTube and just find videos of like skaters like making 16 millimeter or 8 millimeter like films of them skating around Venice in 1980. You know, like there's so much like just like footage online. There's people just putting like the equivalent of like a GoPro back in the day, like an actual home video recorder on their dashboard and just driving around LA just because they wanted to show people what it looked like, you know? So it's like
in 20 years time, it's gonna be so much easier because everyone's photographing everything at the moment. So in 20 years time, when I've got to draw 2020,
it'll just be like everybody just standing around and everybody holding a phone and taking a picture of everybody else that's taking a picture. But yeah, I do love the fact that we can, you know, with the fade out, we made like a historically accurate Los Angeles, and it costs exactly the same as if we'd made Star Wars. You know, like we can Comix is like that's one of the greatest. Yeah, there's no budget. 2 guys in a room cost the same as blowing up the Death Star.
Right. Usually we use that comparison the other way around. That comics it doesn't cost very much money to blow up the Death Star.
Yeah, no, but I think about that. It's like period piece or creating your own world, or you know, there's all these things that you would stop yourself from doing. If you were trying to do it as a TV show or a movie, you'd be like, oh, it's too expensive. No one wants you know, or they already have one of those. You can only have one of anything. Right. And but with comics, it's just like, well, what do we want to write? You know, or what do we want to do? And you know, something like Reckless came almost out of the blue during the shutdown because we were about to start like a monthly comic, and suddenly our distributor was shut down, and you know, it was like, oh, well, what are we going to do? And then we just started kicking ideas around and decided to do something, start working on a graphic novel, you know, because we had Pulp delayed, and it just all kind of snowballed into, you know, this revelation of like, wait, if we, you know, who knows how long this will be shut down? If it's even shut down for 3 months, which is what it was, we will have,
We
you
got
know, the majority of
half
a
a book
graphic
out.
novel done by the time, you know, we will have more than half of a graphic novel done by the time it comes back. And if it takes 6 months, you know, whatever's left of comics, we'll have a book that we can try to figure out how to release. And then it was just kind of like that light bulb moment of like, oh, this is kind of what all of our readership has been wanting us to do for years anyway.
Right.
And they've kind of proven it with, you know, Pulp and My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies. Those sold as well as first issues of our comics would, and it was a complete story. And Reckless has done even better than those. And it's just like, oh, I feel like we kind of accidentally stumbled into something that I remember 10 or 15 years ago going, I wish we could just do graphic novels. And then especially when Darwin put out the Parker books, you know, which are adaptations, but I remember thinking how jealous I felt to hold that book in my hands. Like just the idea that that they had the balls to just put it out as just straight as a graphic novel. And I just thought, you know, it's like that Chinese saying about the crisis and the opportunity. And I just, you know, started jotting down ideas for this series of book and bounced it off of Sean, and we just started working on that instead.
Well, I was hoping it was going to be more like the European version of graphic novels, where you just do 64 pages a year. We ended up doing 300 pages a year instead, so it didn't quite work.
Yeah, but you'd have to do like 18 panels a page in that version.
Yeah, they take a long time to draw. Yeah, I've done 2 French albums, and they took twice as long to draw as a US comic would.
Yeah. No, I think that's one of the things I love about the format actually is it's freed me up writing wise. I feel like doing the graphic novels, especially with Reckless, because with Pulp and Junkies, I was so worried we were going to run out of pages that every page I was just in agony as I wrote for the last half of the book. But with Reckless, I was like, well, this is going to be, you know, 130, 140 pages, whatever, like similar to the Parker books Darwin did. And I just kind of was like, all right, let's have fun. Let's do something different and let's play with the format and let's let the book breathe. And I really feel like, you know, just when I started seeing the first pages, I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what it needs. It's
got a totally different rhythm to a monthly comic, hasn't it? Because we don't have to do 20-page cliffhanger.
Yeah.
3 pages. We don't, you know, and it's helping me for drawing it because I can get into a much better rhythm where I don't have to stop every 4 weeks to go and paint a cover.
Yeah.
You know, and just get totally immersed in this, and you know, as a creator, and as you would as a reader as well. I think, you know.
And I think for me, it's like I always know the end of a story, and I always know like certain goalposts on the way to the end. But when we were doing everything as a monthly comic and then collecting it, the agonizing over the monthly comic chapter every month, like I didn't think far enough ahead every time. So writing them, I think actually took longer. Every chapter took a little bit longer because I agonized over it a little bit more, and I made sure. You know, also on this, if I need extra pages, it's just like, oh well, this chapter's 15 pages, this chapter's 20 pages, this this chapter.
We had a little bit of leeway on the monthly comics because we could go over our page count. We always did at least 24 pages anyway. We could do 27, 32, whatever it needed, but not every month because it would kill me.
Yeah, exactly. I was always worried about that. If I'm like, well, I need 32 pages, but we got to ship.
But then I need an extra week.
These are like, it's interesting. Like I still worry about that now. It's like, I know we have a deadline. We have to get to the printer at X point. I can't suddenly add 20 pages to this book at the end, or you and Jake will die. But there's something about the knowing that it's all just going to come out as one thing that's just really made it more. It keeps me focused on it more. It's like I with writing the monthly comics, because often, especially coming out of the Marvel and DC grind, I'm used to like I'm writing this week, I'm writing this the next week, I'm writing this. Whereas now it's like I'm working on some Hollywood stuff and I'm writing this stuff, and those are my main focuses. And I feel like it's made me move faster. It's made me, almost more excited about getting up every day, because I don't get up every day and worry about the deadline. I get up thinking, all right, like what do I need to do next? What's coming next in this story?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, it seems to me that you're still thinking of the scripting process though in terms of segments, right? Like it's the individual chapters, right? That you
Oh yeah.
They don't necessarily have to be exactly 22 pages long.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Long, but you're still thinking of it in very discrete bites, yeah?
I mean, I try to write. I haven't been able to keep up the last like month or two, but I try to send Sean whole chapters at a time so that he knows everything he's going to need to know. But yeah, I'm thinking of it as far as like one of the things I've always wanted to try to bring into comics is that sort of murder mystery, private eye, like troublemaker, like those airport thriller type of things. I remember years ago, God, probably 30 years ago, Kim Thompson in an article in the Journal talked about how one of the things comics really needed was real mainstream books, like books that are just sort of the equivalent of like a Tom Clancy book or Lee Child wasn't around back then, but he meant it in a sort of benign way, like books that aren't trying to be superheroes or aren't trying to be super arty or are just books that are basically trying to be crowd pleasers. And like, I think when I was young, I was very dismissive of that idea. And the older I've gotten, the more I've started to appreciate just books for escapism too, especially like during the pandemic. That's where Reckless all came from, was me jumping back into reading a bunch of my old favorite like pulp, mystery characters just for pure escape and thinking, why have we never done one of these? And is there a way I can do this that brings a more modern sensibility to it, that makes it feel like, something that's like ours, but is still sort of playing with a lot of these traditions, like that cover, is so like you could have seen it on the spinner rack at the Pick and Save in 1976, and like I think, but I definitely think of it in terms of like the chapters help me, like because I in my outline I outline 3 or 4 chapters at a time, knowing again like I have these goalposts I'm moving towards and I know what the ending is. And often I even have like whole chapters scripted in my notebook, like the basic intent of the chapter or a lot of the actual like narration or text is actually like in the notebook. So it doesn't take that long once I sit down and start typing. But I'm thinking, 3 or 4 chapters ahead in my notebook all the time. I have notes for it. So it really does help to break it into chapters. But yeah, I'm thinking of it as in terms of like, I want these Reckless books to compare to, those series mystery kind of things, like the Travis McGee's or Lou Archer books, or these things that I grew up with.
Yeah, but in terms of your actual process, I suppose at that point, it doesn't sound like there's a huge difference between writing the periodical comic and writing a chapter-based graphic novel. Yeah, right? Because you're looking at discrete units.
Yeah, that's true.
Being organized in that fashion, they just don't have to have a hard limit on them.
The chapters in the graphic novel, they're only chapters to serve the story, whereas in a periodical, you have to take note of the format that you're working in, whereas we don't have to worry about that so much anymore.
Yeah. Whereas
you do a 4-page chapter, you can do a 30-page chapter. It's whatever the story needs.
Yeah, exactly. It's that's the elasticity of what a chapter even means. Like we could have a chapter where it's just him talking about what his favorite words were, whereas if I was doing a monthly comic, I would not choose to give 4 pages where a guy just is like, let me tell you about every ex-girlfriend I ever had. But in the book, I can go off on a tangent like that. I think, for, at least 10 or 12 years, everything that we've done, I've been thinking in terms of the final edition being when the story is collected. But knowing that something like Kill or Be Killed was 24 to 28 to, I think 34 or 36 pages on a couple of chapters, issues, like each issue of those also has to feel like a completely, it's part of a story, but it has to feel like you're getting a complete something, like
a satisfying chunk is the way that
satisfying chunk. Like you're almost, some of our stuff, I would say, like the last big criminal thing we did, Cruel Summer, each of those chapters is almost like a short story that all builds on the ones that came before. Like you want to read them in order, but a whole lot happens in each chapter up until the end when all the different strands come together. Whereas with something like Reckless, it's all one long narrative up until the very end. So that's the main difference. It's sort of the momentum, maybe.
Yeah.
It definitely makes it, like I said, it makes it easier to get up and keep writing every morning. Like when you finish when I finished a chapter of Kill or Be Killed or a chapter of Criminal, I'll often feel like, and then I take a week to agonize over everything that's going to be in the next chapter and what order it's going to be in. And whereas this, I finished a chapter, and I can't remember there's a political writer I heard an interview with who is very prolific with putting out books about stuff. He wrote that book, like What's Wrong with Kansas. But he was doing an interview and he was asked about his productivity, and he said he never ends a chapter and then is like, all right, I'm done for the day. If he finishes a section of a chapter or an actual chapter, he will start gesturing in the first lines of the next thing, even if it's a bad version of it, so that when he sits down the next morning, he's got someplace to start. He's never sitting down to a blank piece of paper. And so I always think in terms of that, like that's the great thing about doing these is like sometimes I will have a 4 or 5 or 6 page chapter. And when I finish that, I'm like, I want to take the rest of the day off. And then I think, all right, I better figure out what the title of the next chapter is and what happens in the first few panels, at least, so I can just immediately jump in the next day.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. When you get pages, Sean, is it a challenge at all now that he might be giving you 4 pages and then giving you 13 pages as opposed to, you were getting 30 pages a month or whatever it was?
No, because even when we were doing monthly comics, I never got a whole issue in one go.
Very rarely.
Tomorrow morning, hopefully, I'll have 8 pages, and it might be a 4-page chapter and 4 pages of the next chapter. I don't know, but or it might be more pages than that. But Ed knows I want 8 pages a week to draw, so we just, it doesn't really matter as long as it could be, half of one thing and then going into the next thing.
Since we started the Reckless books, because we're trying to put out so much material over the course of the 1 year, like we had the lead time for the first book, and
that's all gone now.
Yeah, that's all gone now. We're getting close, but we're almost done with the next book, which goes to print, in about a month and a half, a month-ish, 6 weeks.
I'll finish in 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. But now Sean is. Before that, Sean was reliably 6 or more pages a week, but now it's like 8 pages a week every week. And,
because I don't have anything else to do. There's no other distractions.
Yeah.
So,
he doesn't have to stop covers. He's not doing DVDs.
Yeah, none of that stuff. No, just concentrating on this. And I want to be. It's much better for me to do it like that as well. I get much more involved and engrossed.
And honestly, like I've been really gratified by it, but like part of wanting to switch to the graphic novels and do Reckless the way it was like I'm trying to find some way to, like, I felt like with our work for almost 20 years now, we've been dividing up our audience into these various segments. Like when we first started, almost nothing even got collected, and certainly almost nothing was ever in a hardback book. But 5-6 years in, we were putting out a Criminal Deluxe edition, which was like unheard of before that.
Yeah,
so, now it's like, I noticed with the last Criminal one, especially, like Kill or Be Killed was probably like our best-selling monthly comic single issues for our whole career. They were just very steady. But I discovered like the trades weren't really moving as well, and I just thought some people are just reading it because they want the story, and some people want to collect it, and some people want to wait for the big hardback afterwards. And I felt like we were, dividing our audience into like 3 separate groups that were competing. And I would always be disappointed, especially because when we released the Fade Out in the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 books, because we wanted to try and do one of those $9.99 trades to really, spread the potential audience for it out more. But I was always so bummed because the first one sold so much better than books 2 and 3 that there's a bunch of people out there who've only read the first third of that. And, you know, it's just like, as a writer, there's like kind of a dagger in my stomach. Always, like, I know people buy books and don't finish them all the time, but at least I have the illusion they might.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like as long as I've known you, Ed, you've always had a dagger in your stomach about something.
That's true. That's true. I'm actually much more mellow about it now because I realized it's strange because there's been so many things to be upset about and angry about and everything. But, you know, I got saved from drowning about 1.5 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And not long before I wrote Pulp. And I realized at some point, I remember talking to Seth like 25 years ago at some event, and he was doing a slideshow about, I can't remember the Canadian cartoonist that he's really obsessed with. They've got an award after him. He's not even known in America. But he was talking about this guy's career and how he'd worked for the same magazine for 30 years. And can you even imagine having a career like that as a cartoonist these days? And it always stuck with me. And then I remember after being saved, thinking about all these things in my life and having this moment of realizing that, like, for almost 20 years, I'd basically been living my ideal career, but always feeling like I was still striving to make it without ever having accepted the fact that Sean and I had built this enormous body of work and had this career that every time I'd meet younger creators coming up, they were telling us that, like, we were, you know, some of their like guideposts. And, you know, it was like, oh, wow, okay. Because, you know, I sat down 20 years ago and started writing books with Sean for Sean to draw. And, you know, you look up and it's like, oh, wow, time has passed.
Now, yeah.
Yeah, we're old.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole, like, I looked back at it and I just realized, like, we have a career I would have envied 20 years ago if someone had told me that Sean and I would be doing what we're doing right now and that it would be working. Like, even a couple years ago, I wouldn't have been ballsy enough to try Reckless because it's so much work to put in ahead of time on a project. Like the other graphic novellas that we did, you know, the equivalent of, you know, 3 issues of a comic for us, you know, maybe 2 long issues of a comic for us. So those didn't seem like a huge risk, but, you know, 5-6 months of work is a huge investment, and in a market that has arguably been hard to break for original graphic novels for a lot of people. We've you know, because we've stuck together, I think, and built up a readership, we've been the lucky ones in this moment right now, and that our books are doing really well. But I think about that, and I think, in general, you know more about this than I do, Brian, because you run a chain of stores now. But aren't the successful, like, stuff always kind of the exceptions in a way?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I just I tend to think that the multimodal model. Oh, that was is the best way to make comics work, precisely because different audiences want different things. Now, it's a little different with you guys because, as you say, you've been working together for 20 years, so people understand what Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips production is. They know in their head what that's going to be, even if each book is very different from each other book.
Yeah.
They get where the quality is, what kind of a story generally it's going to be, etc. But I think with most books, you want multiple entry points. Even the most successful graphic novels, if the book is serialized first, we will sell more copies of the serialization. More human beings will buy the serialization than will buy the book.
Yeah,
even in the case of like, we sold fewer copies of Pulp than we would have had it been serialized in 2 or 3 comics.
Interesting.
You know, and then the book on top of it, right?
Because it sold. Oh, and then the book on top of it. Yeah, because I always look at the bottom line of like the end sales of the book. Whereas for what you're saying, for a lot of series like a Saga or a Wicked and Divine or Die or Sex Criminals, any of these things, they had that phenomena. For us, I was finding like we had a little bit of that, but really it was more about like we built this kind of really stable readership.
Yeah.
And they'd kind of been letting us know for a few years that they would rather have nice hardback books.
But one doesn't preclude the other, I guess, is the thing that I'm saying.
There's always people that will buy both.
What?
There's always people that will buy both.
Yeah.
Right, well, you see, that's part of it too, right? Like not just double dipping, but in your case, triple dipping, right? You've got people who have bought the serialization because they're trying to support your guys' career. So they buy the serialization, they buy the paperback, then they buy the expensive hardcover, and then it's going to be an even more like I would actually put to you that like for something like the Big Hard Criminal or whatever it's called, almost every single person who bought that already has that work, right? The second or third time buying, right?
80 or 90% of them.
It's like a Criterion Laserdisc, right? Like nobody's buying a Criterion Laserdisc for the first time they're watching a movie. You know what I mean?
Nowadays, maybe, but
Well,
like now because it's like, but yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, no, it's like I always am buying I bought Blade Runner 10 times, so
yeah. And my literal fear, and these were in my notes for later, though we brought the conversation far ahead of where I wanted to be right now.
Oh, sure.
But I really do wonder how does the math work out on your end of things that you're not getting that double and triple dip on the work. Because when I look at something like a Criminal, for example, Criminal's being serialized at roughly 10 cents a page, right? Oh. And then when you have the paperback is roughly 10 cents a page, whereas Pulp was like 25 cents a page in its original incarnation, and this is like 17 cents a page. Now, it probably adds up so you're making the same amount of money at the end of the day, maybe, but I wonder if you're losing something from that. I mean, if you
we only do it for the love. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, we do it for the well, I think this is a bit of an experiment. This year we'll be able to tell with the Reckless books. I mean, that's part of what the thing is with Reckless was like you say that about Pulp. Pulp sold probably 10,000 more than the two previous issues of Criminal that had come out.
Because
arguably
part of that gets back to the thing that you were talking about before, how the 5th volume of Criminal or whatever didn't sell that great, right? Because it's the 5th one. People go, right? There's always a drop off on the audience, no matter what it is. Actually, here's my best example. Mouse Volume 1 sells about 15 times what Mouse Volume 2 does.
That's
who would buy the first half of Mouse and not want to read the rest of it? And yet, when you look at the numbers, because look at the book scan numbers, it literally sells 10 to 15 times as many copies.
Yeah.
Persepolis, exactly the same way. The first volume of Persepolis vastly outsells the second volume. It's one story.
Yeah.
So, it's just, that's the nature of the commercial enterprise.
Yeah, that is the nature of the serialized. I mean, Walking Dead, Volume 1 is the highest selling graphic novel of all time now, right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
And and the next volume has probably sold a tenth that many copies.
Yeah.
And it is an interesting thing. I don't know. I felt like it was more like we're just doing something because we want to try and do it and see how it works to a large degree, but also Pulp and Junkies kind of proved to me that, because there is that sense of when you start serializing a story, the first few issues you sell really well. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of people go, all right, well, I like this, I'm going to wait and buy the collection. Or, what we always heard from, just a ton of people who, after the second issue of a thing, they just couldn't even find issue 3 or issue 4 at their store if they didn't get there by Wednesday.
Right.
So I just kind of just thought we've been doing this long enough, and no one has arguably, I mean, there probably are. I'm not thinking of them off the top of my head, but no one has really tried to do what we're doing with Reckless, which is switching and trying to bring our audience over to this other format of original content, but then also not making them wait like a year or two for the next volume, like really still trying to make it feel appealing to the periodical comic book store audience, because, you know, let's face it, the comic book store audience is what made, you know, our careers. That's where, you know, I think we're still
we're trying to take advantage of the fact that we are prolific. You know, we can do 3 hardcover graphic novels a year because I can draw that quick and Ed can write that quick, you know, so why not give it a go?
Yeah, and this
on a purely selfish level, I like my comics to be the things I draw. I like them to be in a nice hardcover book on nice paper with nice printed. You know, so
if it were up to Sean, the book would be
if it financially doesn't work out, then we'll be going back to monthly comics. But you know, I like the format and I want to give it a go.
I think it's great. I'm not trying to make any pejoratives here. I'm just, these are questions, especially as a retailer, that I have, right? Because, you know, and if you guys weren't, again, a team that is so well known, that meshes so well together, you have a steady audience, as you said.
I definitely,
most creators, I think, not being on the market is actually death. Some people have reached a point in their careers where, okay, now we're good, but most creators, if you're not out there on a month-to-month basis, the audience forgets about you. They just it's the same reason that for the most part, you know, Netflix is changing this in a way, but for the, you know, most places wouldn't go, we'll do a television show and we'll release it all at once, right? Like you keep it going week after week because you want people to keep tuning in and keeping engaged in it.
Well, one of the things we're discovering too is our backlist is selling a lot more the last like year or so. Like we're having to go back to print with a lot of our stuff. So I just always assumed everyone who was reading our stuff just joined on at Sleeper and has come along the whole way. But then, you know, when I go do like appearances at Comic Cons or stores or bookstores or whatever, I meet all these young people who just discovered us with like Junkies or Kill or Be Killed, who are now like diving into the backlog. So it's, I mean, like I definitely see your point, and I up until probably in the last year, I wouldn't have thought doing Reckless was viable for us, because like you're saying, we're earning X amount of money doing the single issues, and then the trades and the hardbacks basically are all paid for by having published them first. But what you know, what occurred to me was that just we're sort of one of the exceptions in that our readers are following us to these other heavier, you know, hardback books on really nice paper. Like we've sort of cultivated a little bit of an audience. And I also, you know, I talk to a lot of retailers and I hear, you know, there was this brief boom about 8 years ago of crime comics. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, this is gonna be like a thing where everyone does crime comics now, and then it'll go away because, you know, and we'll just be still plugging away at them. And I talked to now, you know, then everything right after that, it was like a bunch of sci-fi comics and then a bunch of fantasy comics, like whatever the waves are. We just have always kept sort of doing our same thing. And I remember last summer talking to a bunch of different shop owners, and they were just basically saying that they can't really sell crime comics other than the odd thing here or there, except for our stuff. Like whatever we're doing, they have a readership for that in their store now because we've just kind of stuck to it. So, you know, in a way, we're using that as an experiment to see, like, okay, well, this is how we'd like to do our comics. Can this be supported? And, you know, from everything we're hearing, because we solicited the second book is in the catalog a month early for advanced soliciting because it takes longer to print hardbacks. And like, you know, we're hearing already feedback from retailers because the first book's been out about a month now, that they're getting massive, you know, advance orders from their customers for it. So I'm just like, all right, this is, you know, I mean, a month ago, I was just like, oh man, this better work. This feels like the worst time to possibly release a book. It could have been worse. We could have released it 3 weeks later.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's going to work just fine for you. I wasn't trying to suggest that this isn't a reasonable plan for you. I just, I do know that as a retailer, I like the periodical money.
Oh,
I
yeah.
like keeping that customer coming in. In a way, it reminds me kind of when Love and Rockets went from being a magazine to being an annual once a year thing. And there was a whole lot of customers who we basically never saw again as a result. They were people coming in every other month or every 3 months for Love and Rockets because that's when it came out. But once it went annual, they went, I don't have time in my life for this anymore. I guess they lost the habit is the thing.
Yeah, I worry about that.
With Necklace, you've got a different situation, obviously, where you're putting these out every 3-4 months. So, you're still got a semi-serialization. I just know that there's an awful lot of cartoonists who, can do one book like this every 2 years. You know?
I wouldn't recommend anybody else use us as an example as far as, because even us, it was like, I mean, we would have loved to have been doing books like this 15 years ago. They would have sold 3,000 copies, and we would have been, Sean would have been begging to draw like the Hellblazer reboot.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a sense that we kind of, we did Junkies because Sean wanted to draw a graphic novel and a romance comic. And I apparently wanted to write about my childhood of being forced to go to all my mom's meetings. But that was such a, like, I didn't think anybody but us would care. And then that was like a huge hit, and a huge hit in comic stores, a huge hit in bookstores. And it reached new readers that we'd never reached before because it looked like a young adult book to a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, that's how we've always approached stuff, isn't it? We've never chased a hit. We just do what we want to do.
Yeah.
If enough people read it, then we can do another one.
I think the only time I consciously thought about, is this going to be a hit, was when we did Incognito, which partly was frustration over us not owning Sleeper. And I thought, well, I'll do the flip side of the same kind of idea about a bad guy who's forced to be, a good guy. And that was really the only time I just thought, what if we just did Criminal, but someone was putting a mask on the cover? I wonder if it would sell twice as well. And it did.
Yeah.
But notice it's the one that we talk about the least.
Well, Jordan keeps putting up, he's like been banging it on the table that we've got a question from the audience. So we're gonna put a pin in this and take a question from the audience.
Yeah.
Gary Esposito, Sean, how do you go about designing the covers for these Reckless graphic novels? Found it fascinating that the protagonist has his back to the viewer on the cover of a debut novel. Was that planned?
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? No. Yeah. I don't know why I did that, because you can't see his face.
You can see his scar.
Yeah, I hadn't realised that till just now. I mean, the inspiration is those 70s pulp novels. Ed sent me piles of JPEGs of that stuff, and we just went for that. I've been doing the last few years. I've been in quite a few DVD covers, and there've been a lot of montages. And the new Criminal hardcovers have had montage covers as well. And it's just something I wanted to do, and it suits this type of story, the sort of thing we're trying to ape, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, because I do design them, I get to do whatever I like. There's no one to tell me that's a bad idea. In fact, this is the second cover we did. We did do another one originally, which we never used.
That's the poster.
Yeah, we used it as a poster, but it was going to be the book cover, but it didn't suit it quite as much because I did it so far in advance that we didn't know what the story was going to be. So this one suits the story more. And I think it gives more of a flavour of what we're aiming for.
You drew that one when you'd already drawn, I think, the first 50 pages of the book.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Which is probably the first time that's happened for any of our books.
God, yeah.
except for those hardback collections when you do a cover later,
Yeah, because we didn't really have much of the schedule for this is so much longer that we had the luxury of that.
Yeah. Because we finished that book in September.
Pardon?
We finished that book in September, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it only took me 4 months to draw it as well, so that's pretty good.
Yeah. Do you you say you work with photographs, but you're only photographing yourself. Do you you're not photographing people, or you have people in mind when you're constructing characters? Do you?
Sometimes Ed might say, "Give me an actor to keep in mind," but I don't usually. I don't go and look at photos of them to base it on. I mean, it's just sort of like a feel rather than the specifics. But like for this particular cover here, the bad guy was based on a photo of me. Reckless is based on me. That character is based on my wife, the woman at the bottom there. Not facially, but she modelled for some of the pictures. The girl with the purple hair, she's from an artist reference book. There was some artist reference books that came out in the 70s called Fairburn, and that's just full of photos of different people with making different faces. So I use those quite a lot. They're very 70s though, so I always have to change the hair.
Right.
But I can see them in quite a lot of places. Frank Miller used them a lot for that electrographic novel he did in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
And they pop up in quite a lot of people's artwork, but you wouldn't know if you hadn't seen the books.
Yeah.
But yeah, I try to make it look not like me, but they always end up looking like me, no matter who it is.
Pulp is the best one.
Because I use myself. Sorry?
Pulp is the best one, where it's like you with the cowboy hat on the top.
Yeah, but that wasn't even based on a photo of me. That was a different photo. That wasn't me.
You just instinctively, you're
the
like,
hat was me on my head, but the face was somebody else.
I love it.
I love it.
I just can't do anything else.
I'm not an artist, so I don't know if I'm going to frame this question correctly, Sean. But is there a big difference for you between the black and white cartooning of a character and, you know, a 1970s kind of movie poster of a character? Do you have to think about it differently? Is it? I don't.
Not really, because the cover usually, especially this time, has come a lot later than I've already drawn the characters for 50 pages, so I know what they look like. I mean, it's the actual line drawing that I did for the cover before I started adding the colour. I'd approach that the same way I approached an interior page. So the only difference for the painting thing is to try and make it look like a painting. You know. But I know how to do that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, particularly the period piece kind of thing too. It's got that.
Yeah, but I don't think there's anything particular on that cover that makes it look like 1980s, apart from the guy with the moustache. But everything else, you know, it just is quite generic looking.
It's got that sort of faded cream color background that a lot of the books have.
We did
too.
that. Yeah. I mean, I think all the period stuff we do, most of the period stuff we do, it doesn't scream period usually. We don't put in very specific. Well, I don't put in very specific fashions or cars or furniture and stuff. You know, I try to make it not be quite so obvious. Even like for Fade Out, even though it was set in 1948, there was stuff in there that would have been from the 30s or 20s even. Because no one fills a house with loads of new stuff. You know,
exactly.
There's always old stuff that continues. I mean, I've got stuff in my house now that's 50 years old. I mean, my house is 200 years old. So, you know, it all sort of... you know, there's lots of different time periods in the same thing.
I do feel like that the opening chapters of this really do capture the feel of like late 70s, early 80s LA, like when I would come up here as a teenager and to go shopping or see a punk show or something. The skate people at Venice and
I mean, I looked at a load of old photos of that sort of thing and tried to do my own version of it. But I've never even been to LA until 18 months ago when I went to see Ed. So it's all, and even then it doesn't look like it looked in the 80s.
Absolutely. We sat on the friend's couch.
Jake was really impressed with that. Jake's a big Friends fan.
It's funny to me that the younger generation likes Friends more than the generation it was aimed at.
Pretty popular at the time. I don't know. Got another question, Jordan, yeah? Popping it up. Podrigo. I'm intrigued by the contrast between, quote, the decline of Western civilization and the reference to From Here to Eternity at the end. how many of these references do you define before the final script?
I hadn't actually thought about the From Here to Eternity reference. I just knew I wanted him to be surfing at the end. Like I knew, like I live in a little beach town now, and I go to and before the pandemic, I went to the beach almost every day, often like going boogie boarding or body surfing. And I just really wanted that feeling, and also it just seemed, it's so California to have your epilogue chapter be your main character surfing as he's sort of ruminating on the mystery. The Decline of Western Civilization, it's one of those seminal movies of my childhood, and I wanted to call the last chapter that because the last chapter is about a guy. I mean, the whole book essentially comes from the idea, those moments when you look back at those big loves of your life and you realize how much time has passed and that you no longer feel heartbroken over them, and that you've kind of gotten over it without even thinking about it. And it's just this piece of your past that's there, and how there's just something kind of tragic about that. And I just thought the title for the chapter, The Decline of Western Civilization, just sort of went with the way what Ethan was sort of saying there, which is kind of like, it just all sort of coalesced. I think about that, so much of the chapter titles are just sort of spewing out pop culture references or trying to sort of be playful with what a chapter title is in a book. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's very much so. Very much so. I mean, particularly when you were talking about in terms of finishing a chapter and then putting down the title of the next chapter and things like that to get you started for the next day, I can see how that can really work.
Yeah, it gives. I mean, this is one thing about us having been doing this for so long. Like, I definitely allow us to break rules and be, like in the first book there's a chapter that's all from the point of view of the bad guy. And I think it's even called like Wilder's point of view. And that was kind of a little bit of a nod to Westlake, how Westlake would do that in the Parker books, where he'd have like a whole section written from someone else's point of view, kind of. Mm-hmm. But as I was doing it, I just thought, am I going to have to do one of these in every book after that? Because I like doing this, but I don't know if I want to have to do it all the time. And then I just thought, we can do whatever we want. It's our book. Yeah. So there's not one in the next chapter, or in the next book. There's no chapter from anyone else's point of view. It's all Ethan telling you the story. But I just thought, I think because we've been around for so long, and because we're just this constant machine of creating books and stories, I now just kind of look at everything that we're doing as a way to sort of try to experiment with the form more and have fun with it and be more playful. That's one of the reasons I was really attracted to the idea of doing these sort of pulp novels, is because there's such a simplicity to what they are, just the genre in general. They're generally a good person in a really dark situation trying to, sort of fight their way out of it somehow. And they're a very simple structure to try to lay all this other stuff that I wanted to talk about on top of it, about sort of looking back at our past and talking about, things that we knew about back in the 70s and 80s that we still sort of are grappling with today.
Yeah. This may be a stupid question, Ed, but the difference between using crime as a tool to talk about the human experience versus using the superhero medium, mm-hmm. Does one work better? Does one obviously you brought a lot of heart to the superhero stuff you were doing too.
Yeah. But I always approached it from the superhero stuff that I'm the most proud of when I give it to people, it's like the Catwoman stuff that I did with Darwin and, the other artists that when I was on that book for the first couple of years. Like that was all very grounded in sort of a crime feel, even though it had that over-the-top Darwin Cook excitement to it too. Gotham Central, which is pretty much just a police procedural, but it's about supervillains. And Captain America and Daredevil are both very, like, one was an espionage book in my head, and the other one was pretty much a gritty crime story. So I always have kind of approached things from that point of view. I think for me with superheroes, I got to a point where I'd read so many and written so many that they just started to seem pointless to me.
Yeah.
Like every superhero story other than Watchmen, and there's probably several other ones since then. But when I was writing various Avengers kind of things, I just had this kind of mental break where I just thought, whatever story I'm trying to write here, however much fun I'm trying to have, the end of this story is a bunch of people put on costumes and go punch each other, and whoever wins the fight is the good guy. And that's like every variation of every story. And life just, especially at that moment, life just did not feel like the good guys were winning. And it just feels like it's a kind of an escapist fantasy. And I love escapist fantasies, but I feel like crime is about the human condition in a way that is more interesting to me maybe than, like, superhero comics are really about our desire to be saved, or for, I'm just making this up off the top of my head, but on some level, like, it goes all the way back to fairy tales, of we're always waiting for some powerful person to come in from outside and fix some, problem that is going on, that we all stand here and go, hey, this is corruption, or hey, this is murder, and nothing's happening. And we see that in life still today. And I think that's why some of this stuff is so popular still. Like 80% of the culture on television right now feels like superhero comics now. So it's a weird thing. I don't know. I almost never think about superhero comics anymore. And when I do think about superheroes, I'm either reading one by a friend of mine, or I am watching a TV show or a movie, like, it's just, I'm a 54-year-old man. I wrote 1,000 superhero comics, I think. So I view them completely differently than most people. But I also appreciate the fan base of it, and I appreciate the fact that they do provide escapism for people, and that there is still something there. I mean, so much of what I am as a person and what I believe as morality, I think, comes from being raised by, decent people, and being raised as like a guy who obsessively read superhero comics. I have a very hardcore, idea of what injustice is, and that we all sort of know the difference between right and wrong, and that we should all be able to point it out when we see it.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes. Ethan Reckless is like the sort of, he's a different version of that kind of character. He's not a superhero for sure, but he definitely goes in and doesn't give a shit what happened to him. And if he thinks you're the person who's doing evil, he will fix you.
Yeah. No, I like. That's good.
That's good.
Yeah. Hey, I gotta step away for just 1 second. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Which gives me a good place to ask some process questions for you, Sean.
Sure.
So once you sit down to start actually penciling the book, you've already made all of your decisions for the most part, based on what you were showing us before. Do you work physically? Do you work digitally? What's
Both. At the moment, since when did I start? Since Junkies, I've started penciling digitally, printing that out on paper and inking traditionally.
interesting?
Just because, well, my art dealer likes to have original art to sell, and I found because before that, Fade Out and Kill or Be Killed were purely digital, and I found it quite frustrating because there's no accidental marks. A real brush or a real pen is much harder to control, and it makes marks that you don't necessarily want or aiming for. Whereas digitally, you can't do that. It's almost impossible. You have to fake it. And also, I was getting too tight and a bit too detailed, and just a little bit bored as well. You know, I tried to. I want to keep it interesting for myself. So at the moment it's digital pencils, and I draw in Clip Studio Paint rather than Photoshop because it's got very good perspective tools. So there's a lot more perspective in my work at the moment because it's so much easier to do digitally than it was on paper with a giant ruler and a piece of string, how it used to be. So, but then I can then print that out, and I get to make some nice marks with some different pens that I might not have used before. Quite a lot of Reckless has been done with some different brush pens and stuff that I hadn't used for a while because a couple of years ago I went to Tokyo and got taken to a massive, amazing art shop and just bought an example of every pen they had, really, to see what I liked. And so I'm working my way through those at the moment.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
You do your thumbnails at basically full size of the actual comic.
Yeah, that's because that's the print. That's the smallest book they could print.
No. I dig that. And you're penciling digitally. When you print it out, are you printing it out at sort of traditional?
No, at the moment it's
11 by, whatever those are, the bigger pages.
Are you like 8x12 now?
This is a page.
Okay.
That doesn't give away any spoilers, I don't think. It's 125% of print size at the moment because.
So you're like 8x13 or something, or 8 and a quarter?
It is. Usually 150%. So like half up would fit on there with very small margins, and I just want to make it a little bit smaller so there'd be less chance of me messing up the edges of the pages. I'm thinking next time, well, not for Reckless, but whatever we do after Reckless, I might draw much bigger.
Oh wow!
Just to see, but just to keep it interesting for myself. I've been talking online the last couple of days with Brian Hitch and a couple of other people about drawing like 200% up.
Oh, like those. A couple
of guys that I know that work on Human Comics with the Beano here, and they draw at 240%, which is massive. So I'm not going to be that stupid. That's crazy. But just so I can.
How would you scan
it? Because otherwise, when I'm drawing, I'm sort of like this, and I'm barely moving, and I want to be able to do this more when I'm making marks. So I don't know. I haven't decided yet. It makes it harder because then I have to, instead of being able to print it out on one piece of paper, I'd have to lightbox stuff on a bigger piece of paper, and then I'd have to scan it in lots of sections. So by the time it actually comes to that project, whatever it might be, I might have changed my mind because it might feel like that's too much like hard work. Years ago, when I was painting comics for 2000 AD, I'd paint twice up, and they would be like 9x12 anyway when they're printed, so they'd be really big. But I didn't have to scan the artwork. I'd just deliver the artwork to the publisher, and they'd have to worry about that. But now I've got to do it myself. It's hard work.
How big of a scanner do you even have?
Well, it's A3, whatever that is in American. Okay. 11 by 17 inches. Something like that. Yeah. So I can scan a page in one piece.
Yeah. You'd have to do a page in 2 pieces.
No.
Double up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would have to. Yeah.
Like that. Be about the size of that Wally Wood Artist Edition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Well, things like Dark Knight and Ronin, Frank Miller drew those at 175% or something like that. So they were bigger than normal pages.
Oh, wow.
So maybe try that. There's a French artist called Paul Gillen who draws massive pages, but they still look very dynamic and rough. I'll be using a bigger tool to make the marks if I drew bigger, and I wouldn't get caught up in too much detail, I don't think. I know, we'll see. That Spirit page we did, Ed, I drew that massive.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that page.
A couple of years ago.
We can never reprint it anywhere.
Sorry?
We can never reprint it anywhere because it's only...
No, too big. Yeah, Brian, a few years ago, I curated a magazine or newspaper-sized comic for the Lakes International Comic Art Festival here in the UK. And the idea of that was to do a newspaper-sized comic because because we could. I discovered a printer that would do that for me. So, and we did a Spirit special because of the centenary of Will Eisner's birth. So we did a 12-page newspaper, and Ed and I did a 1-page story for that. And Brian Hitch and Jonathan Ross did a page, and people like Seth did a page, Chris Samley, Duncan Fagredo, lots of different types of artists. Viz, which is like a human comic in the UK, they did a page. But it was massive, and I had to draw it even bigger. So that was quite interesting, but a pain because I had to scan it in 4 pieces. That's
I've looked at that.
Format.
I've looked at that a few times and tried to figure out if there's a way we could rejigger it to make it work.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think it's ever going to get reprinted. And also, we had special permission to do it, so whoever owns the Spirit rights might not be that keen on us reprinting it anyway.
Yeah. Well, we won a bunch of Eisner Awards. Maybe that'll.
Yeah, it did get nominated.
Every time you get an Eisner Award, you get to do anything you want with the Spirit.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
It's the secret Eisner Award.
I mean, at some point, it's going to fall into the public domain, isn't it?
I mean, I think that
when I'm dead, probably.
The government and the corporations are going public domain is an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, Mickey Mouse should have been public domain, and Superman, and
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes is still fighting off the idea of him being nice is apparently not in public domain yet. They're suing that Enola Holmes movie because he's nice in it. And it's like, he was only nice in the very last story, which is still under copyright. So remember, if you write Sherlock Holmes in your things, make him an asshole, or technically it's not public domain. I know, it's ridiculous.
All right. So Sean, so you print them out and you ink them, and then you're scanning them back in. That's you?
Right. Yeah. And when I print them out, I print out the lettering as well, because I'd letter it digitally with a font that Comic Craft made my handwriting. Well, for Criminal, I use other fonts for Reckless and other things. So the dialogue and everything is on the actual artwork too. But that gets replaced when it gets scanned in because it's not crisp enough. So that gets replaced digitally at the end. And then I send it to Jake and he colours it in.
Yeah. Are you? How do you work with Jake? I'm interested in that.
I just let him do whatever he wants. Really.
You just trust him to do it, or
I just right at the beginning, because the first thing he coloured first was the Junkies book, and that's because I had a very specific idea of how I wanted it coloured, and it didn't seem right to ask a colourist to do exactly what I wanted and in a really specific way. So I was going to colour it myself. But then, like Ed says, hardcovers take longer to print. We didn't know that at the beginning, and we ran out of time. So I just coloured the first 2 pages, and then Jake did the rest. But I gave him the palette of colours and showed him what I'd done on the first couple of pages, and then left him to it. And he turned out to know what he was doing. And then we thought we'd carry on using him, and he coloured Criminal for us, and that turned out really nice too. Ed was relieved that it was, it was good. And so now I just leave him to it. I mean, he never wanted to be a comic colorist. I mean, he draws his own comic for Image as well at the moment, and he never really wanted to be a comic book artist, but he just sort of fell into it.
He's got it in Jake. In a lot of our early comics, anytime there's a kid, the person who posed for the photos is Jake. Like, he's Bruce Wayne at the wing.
In that Batman issue we did, yeah.
He's Bruce Wayne. He's the girl from Junkies when she's a little kid in Coward, I think was Jake, right? Or was that Archie?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Jake.
My eldest son, Fred, who's 30 now, but he was 15 when we first did Criminal. He plays the woman in that.
Oh.
Because he had long hair, so that it was handy for that.
But yeah, Jake. Jake has worked out great. What's interesting is he's so like his own kind of artist, and yet at the same time coming in, like Sean and I have been doing comics our entire lives, I feel like. So every now and then, like, Jake will turn in a bunch of pages, and I'm like, oh, these are all great, and then I look and I just see like one thing that it's like, wait, but why does this background stand out so much? And it's just like he's still learning what the hell he's doing.
Yeah.
Wall still being, I think, one of the most interesting, and inventive colorists in comics. And I don't think I've had I had like 2 notes on the new book. And, it's like, when we started Reckless, I sent him, I think, like 12 photos from like Terrence Malick, and various like sort of California noir-y kind of tone stuff, just sort of like this palette, basically. This is what, because when you guys came to LA, I kept thinking, no, but LA used to be green.
When we were there, it rained all the time anyway, so
yeah,
we didn't see the sun when we came to LA.
That's true.
It was horrible weather.
Fair.
Mostly I just jump to it, and if he does anything that we don't like, then I change it. He always sends me unflattened files so I can go in and tweak it if I need to. But sometimes, it's a bad color choice, but sometimes it might be that I've drawn something and he couldn't tell what it was, so he's colored it.
Yeah.
As if it's something else, It might just be a bad drawing on my part.
Yeah. There's like hair that's a wall or something.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. But yeah, he's really, I just,
But he colors his own stuff totally differently. He does that Texas Blood, which he draws colors and letters, but the coloring style on that is totally different to the coloring style he uses on any of our things. Yeah. And he's got a new book. He's working on a new book at the moment, and that's again totally different to what we've been doing. So
yeah, he's really
versatile.
He's exactly. He's
and he's too busy. If anybody else wants him, he can't work for anybody else.
No. And as far as I know, we're just making him work for us forever now.
Yeah.
My big fear is we'll lose him now and have to find another colorist. This is too easy.
Yeah,
we don't have to pay him because he's Sean's son. We pay him quite well.
Gets paid well, yeah.
Well, I very much like the way he uses shapes in the color. It's all, kind of chunks of color holds or whatever it's called. I'm not very good at the technical stuff. I'm fascinated by the approach because it's very different than what you see in most comics. Yeah,
it really. I don't think anybody is doing comic book coloring the way he is. And I know he got, he looked at what like Dave and Betty and some of our other colorists had done and just kind of saw the things that he thought were working and developed his own style of coloring.
I showed him some things that Betty had done in Fade Out. Say, I really like this. I've got no idea how she did it. But figure it out. Do it like that.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how she did it either. So he's had to go his own way, and it sort of is a new thing instead.
Yeah, I think Dave and Betty both started doing the sort of coloring around the lines, especially Betty more in like the Fade Out, just coloring around like over the drawing and outside the drawing and stuff. And it really, Jake's really taken to that. And I love it. I look at other people's comics now and I always want to just tell the colorist, like, stop worrying about the lines.
Yeah.
Like, I know that's right for every comic.
It gets flatted like a real comic. So everything is inside the lines.
Yeah.
But then he goes and does his thing over the top. Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like a whole other layer of art being done to it. And it draws me into the story more. It makes me feel like each scene has its own color palette in a way. It's really fascinating the amount of craft he puts in, especially considering the fact that he is drawing 2 other comics on the side that he's doing the art lettering and coloring for. But you're always worried about your colorist.
But he's young and keen. He's not jaded like us.
No, if he were old like us, we'd have to force him to quit all those other books.
Yeah.
I'm after talking with you, Sean, about this, I'm really impressed with your, I don't know if it's work ethic is the right way to put it, but the steps that you're doing in this, where you're printing out a book and doing full-size thumbnails first off, and then you're taking photographs, and then you're digitally doing it and printing them out and then scanning them back in again. It seems like a lot of work to me.
No, not really, because it's the way it's evolved to make it quicker. I mean,
you do 8 pages a week that way.
But you do 8 pages a week. That was actually the point.
On Monday, I would.
It's an amount of work to get done, given all of the steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, but on Monday, I thumbnail 8 pages and I shoot my photograph. So I thumbnail them in the morning, shoot my photograph in the afternoon, and then the rest of the week I draw 2 pages a day. And that's just, I find it easier. You know, I'm slowed down the older I've got. I used to be quicker, but you know, it's just, you know, it definitely helps having a proper routine on this particular book.
Yeah, I feel like
rather than a monthly comic, but
yeah, I feel like you've gotten a little bit faster this year.
yeah. But you know,
maybe because you also were on pandemic lockdown. You only got
nothing else to do
this year.
Yeah.
Sean, you know, living in the UK pre-Brexit, Sean would be going on these European vacations several times a year with his wife and family and stuff. I remember actually your last vacation. Remember you were somewhere. Ian Rankin was there. And
and Mark Millar.
Mark Millar and
then Jock turned up the day we left.
Yeah, it was like a little comics crime writer thing that you in like the Canary Islands or something. And I remember just writing to Sean, "Don't catch that virus everyone's talking about."
Well, someone like the next hotel I did get it the week after. Yeah.
Yeah, you said like someone at Mark's place got it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
yeah, but I don't feel particularly prolific. It's just that it's the way it's always been. Yeah. I quite like having money. And if I don't do any drawing, I don't get any money. I find that a really good incentive.
Sure. Again, I talk to a lot of cartoonists. You're very prolific, my friend.
I don't play video games, so I have a lot of time.
You know, even just that part of it, putting aside the photographing part of it, like that you're getting 8 pages a week done. That is like maybe 10% of people can produce like.
Yeah, but I've got it's a simple style. You know, I don't put a lot of detail in, so.
Yeah.
You know,
I disagree.
I would also disagree. Yeah.
I think most comic book artists are in awe of Sean's like abilities and productivity, but also the fact that he can draw 2 people standing there talking and smoking cigarettes and make it like a page someone wants to frame. Yeah. You know, like
that's a challenge. Yeah.
I look at so many samples of artists at like convention stuff I have for years, and so many comic book artists. You know, I remember when I was growing up trying to show my samples to people when I was 12, 13 years old. I remember watching Jim Shooter like just tear people apart, or Joe Rubenstein and these guys. And one of the first things they would always say is, "You don't know how to draw people wearing clothes. Half of the comic is going to be people wearing clothes and talking. You got to be able to do all that stuff. You can't, you know." And then you go back and you look at like early Kirby. My favorite era of Kirby, like the pre-super blocky Kirby, is like that from 55 to like 68 or so, when like nobody drew people just walking around in clothes better than Jack Kirby. Yeah. There's so many great scenes in the Fantastic Four of the Avengers. It's just everybody wearing these cool tweed coats and hats. Like hats. Yeah, they always had hats, and ladies had hats, and you got the sense you just went out into New York and just looked at people and just drew what they were wearing, and you know. Yeah,
but I spent 10 years drawing girls' comics where I had to draw real stuff, so you know.
I always love that when you draw a panel in there that reminds me that you drew the girls, like the panel in the second book where she's DJing. To me, that's so much like a girls' comic.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. And also, I didn't draw superhero comics until I'd been working for almost 20 years. I think it was...
Wildcats?
No, I did a couple of issues of a Batman thing for Archie Goodwin. It was like 97, 98, so I'd already been working for 17, 18 years.
And our first thing was Batman.
Yeah, but that was a few years later.
Barely, yeah. That was really a
so I've never learned how to draw superhero comics, really. Whenever I've done them, I always feel like a total fake. So I can draw the bits when they rip over their shirts to reveal their superhero suits, but after that, it's the hard stuff. The fighting stuff, the flying, the punching, I can't draw that.
Yeah. I love it too because you said that's what you wanted to draw at the beginning, and
yeah, I thought I did. Yeah, I mean, and even now, I mean, it's been a long time since I've done any superheroes, but to get to draw Spider-Man for a real job still like blows my tiny mind. You know, when I was 8 doing it for fun, I thought that I'd actually get to do it properly as a job. Amazing, you know. And sometimes, I mean, I had a couple of years when I was going to cons when I wouldn't draw any characters that weren't mine. Because I thought it didn't do me any favors to just draw zombie Wolverine for everybody. So I just did my own things. But the last couple of years, well, before this year, obviously, I like nothing better than someone coming up and ask me to draw a picture of Spider-Man or Batman or whatever. Because it's still a big thrill to do that stuff. I mean, I wouldn't really want it as a full-time job anymore. But you know, for the odd sketch here and there for a couple of days is great fun still. You know, it reminds me why I loved reading that stuff.
Yeah.
Back then, you know, like Ed says, I don't really read superhero books anymore unless my friends are drawing them.
Sure. Well,
I know art anyway. I never ever buy a comic.
We'd much rather have you guys doing stuff like this, and you know.
I mean, yeah, one day we might do a superhero book, but I don't think either of us really feel the need.
Yeah.
If I did one, I'd want to do one that was more aimed at like kids or something at this.
Oh yeah, totally, yeah.
But like, what would be the Watchmen version of a thing aimed at 9-year-olds?
Well, get thinking about that.
Been murdered, Lucy.
Coming from us in 2022. That's what we'll be doing next.
Watchmen Babies and V for Vacation.
Yeah. Vacation. I like
that. We have another question, Jordan tells me. From Peter, there he is. I was going to get that question from Peter. Ethan Reckless seems to be a nihilist given what's happened to him in the past. Yet why does punk subculture leave him cold? That's a really
He's too old.
Yeah, he's 31. I mean, he's an interesting character. He is sort of nihilistic about humanity, but at the same time, he's sort of a humanist.
Yeah.
But yeah, the punk thing was more just about his. I think it's more just, you know, he's just too old. He doesn't want people coming in and trashing his movie theater. It's like, it's very much about the movie theater, less than about the punk subculture. Like, I definitely, you know, I mean, Anna, his assistant, is definitely like a LA punk rock scene chick. So he definitely respects that, but he doesn't want, you know, hundreds of slobs like spilling beer and pissing all over his movie theater and tearing out seats, which, having been to many showings of The Decline in the early 80s, that's all the kind of stuff that happened.
I hope we still have movie theaters at the end of this.
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, everything's going to come back on some level.
Maybe. It's going to come back different. At
least comics will be the only type of entertainment we can have in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought the pandemic was going to kill comics, and comics have had a pretty good year. Like, I know a lot of shops have struggled more, and other shops have figured out ways to do better. Like, the fact that the publishing industry did so well just really made me feel like I had moments there when we started working on Reckless. Even I just kept thinking, will there even be a market to release this into? Yeah. This is like our biggest release in 10 years.
Yeah.
Like,
the curious thing to me is it really looks to me like the ones that are hurting the most are actually Marvel and DC. Because what I hear from small publishers consistently is our sales are way up. We're doing great. Things are booming.
Image is having their biggest orders since I think when Saga and Fatale launched, when they first started booming again. And then, you know, I think this recent run of launches from, you know, I mean, they've gotten a lot more of the sort of guys who made their names in the last 10 years at Marvel and DC coming over now.
Yeah.
You know, but I heard that new Kyle Higgins book is like one of their top ordered books. Nice. Radiant Black. Yeah. It's like one of their top ordered books, which they were really pushing it off of his, I guess he had a really successful run on Power Rangers or something. So it's a weird time, but yeah, I think you're right. I think, well, I mean, for one thing, like as you've eloquently pointed out, a lot of retailers are really pissed at what DC did by making their lives complicated. And I remember when the new 52 was launching was right when all of us were moving over to Image with our books. And like Sean and I were launching Fatale, Brian was doing Saga, Sex Criminals was about to come. Like a bunch of us were suddenly bringing stuff over there, and DC was rebooting their line, and all of our sales were insane. And a lot of people counted that for that DC had sort of given a lot of people excuses to stop collecting books, but they didn't want to stop collecting comics, so they looked for new things by names that they knew, you know. Yeah. And you know, I remember I wasn't working at a store back then, but I mean, you've been, you know, you grew up in the same kind of world I did. I worked at stores as a teenager, and like you would listen to the fans of stuff. But I remember when when they canceled the X-Men comics for 6 months in the 90s, my roommate was working at a comic store at the time. And he's like, yeah, half of the people who subscribe to X-Men at our store just canceled their subs. Yep. Like they were just waiting for a jumping off point.
Yep. No, I think that's unfortunately kind of true with the way that superheroes are right now, and how both Marvel and DC, have just done excess with Batman and Spider-Man, where there's now 27. You can't keep up anymore. It's not possible. So
I don't
looking for off ramps.
I don't.
They don't want off of comics. People love comics. Comics, great. Anyway,
it's an odd time though. I always think about that saturation. Having been there after having been in indie comics and always being like so angry that we couldn't get shelf space anywhere because there were too many Marvel and DC books, and then to have been there and tried to talk to them about some of this stuff, about how they are costing themselves money by not doing things differently. And it's just it's endless frustration of, it changed after Disney bought them. That's all I'll say. I watched them go from a company that had some long-term thinking to a company that couldn't think more than 3 months ahead.
Yep.
And that's, and we all knew that Paul Levitz was actually saving DC Comics from Warner Brothers for 25 years. Yep. And it turned out he did, So
DC, I don't even know what's going to happen with. I don't think they're going to be publishing.
You're DC. You're like a DC store. You were the Vertigo store as in my life. So when you said that thing about
but you know what? I'd much rather be an Image store than a Vertigo store. I'd much rather be a Vault store. I'd much rather be a Boom store than a DC or Marvel store. So it all works out, I guess.
All those places too right now, especially everybody I know who's publishing through Image or Boom or any of these places, they're all just doing it out of the love of what they're doing. Yes, some of them become big hits. I've learned in this career, if you can just sustain a career and build a body of work, you can make a living, you can create a lot of good stuff. If you're constantly chasing hits, you're just going to feel like a failure no matter what you do, and you're never going to figure out what your own voice is. Your voice will always be trying to do whatever the last hit was, but your version, And, I got lucky early on in that I had an editor read one of my pitches and say, "Why are you trying to be Neil Gaiman? You're Ed Brubaker."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, because Neil Gaiman sells 1 million copies. Seems like a good person to be. But are you gonna enjoy it?
Ed Brubaker,
Yeah, exactly. It took it takes some time. Making a living in any field creatively, retail you're a retailer in a creative field. Like all this stuff is so hard to do, and we all once you get to the point where you're doing it, you forget how hard it is to do. And how many people out there wish that they could do it too, because you got to this point and then you're just on the train. You got to keep it moving or it'll go away for you. Like I have a career in Hollywood as well. I think about my comics as much or more than I think, because I have more control over the comics. It's me and Sean and Jake and me and Marcos and Munza. It's like it's very easy. I'm a control freak. I love that Sean designs everything from the front to the back cover on our books,
Yeah. I'm with you.
Don't let anybody else touch it.
I always tell people when people write to me to complain about like how DC's collecting Sleeper or not collecting Sleeper correctly or whatever, or Gotham Central or whatever, I always just write back, they don't consult us. We have nothing to do with it. I apologize. Like I wish that they would just license it to us to put out our own version of. It would be great.
Yeah.
Maybe that's as you pointed out, Brian, maybe that's a future.
That would, if that works out, that would be great. You can actually get Sleeper back at that point. Boy, that would be funny.
That would be kind of amazing.
Oh man. All right. Well, so Jordan tells me we got one last question from the audience. So let's bring that up and then we can start wrapping this up. Deanie Jude 7. There's an interesting name. Ed, this may seem like an odd question, but I want to ask you about your mindset while writing Dylan in Kill or Be Killed. Did that come from a personal perspective or just something that interests you?
Well, confessionally, that was pretty much, I mean, it's hard to say. Everything you write is somehow personal and some part of yourself. I think I started working on Kill or Be Killed during the mid 2016, like March, April 2016, when things were getting really ugly with the election and with the world in general. It just seemed like everything was on a really negative trajectory. And I think my mind just needed to write some kind of hate mail to the world at that point. And it started out being very much like trying to tap into what I had loved about superhero comics. I wanted to do a thing where a guy put on a mask and went out every month and had to try to accomplish something. And he was somehow, you know, not necessarily a hero because he was obviously a crazy person. But I definitely felt like I was kind of channeling a lot of, I had quit Twitter right around the same time, and I'd never had any other social media. And I think I was channeling a lot of just the sort of anxiety and rage that I was seeing in the world around me, and this sense of hopelessness that, you know, I would say 90% of the world feels, any of us who don't really feel like we have a voice. And so I feel like I was channeling a lot of that stuff, and at the same time, sort of trying to make it a little bit of a black comedy. There's some nods to Catcher in the Rye and Taxi Driver in there, and a lot of nods to Spider-Man from the early 70s era, where, you know, Harry and Peter and Mary Jane were in the romantic triangle. I was definitely riffing on that kind of idea of like, what would you know, put on a mask, but you just shoot bad people instead of, you know, swinging around from building to building. Yeah. So it definitely, it started out trying to be something fun. And then as the world got darker and darker, it continued to reflect that. And it became a place where I could spew some of that stuff that was in me, knowing that some of it is exaggerated and a lot of it isn't stuff I really feel. But it felt like a black satire on the world that we were living through at that moment to me.
Very good. Very good. Let's start wrapping this up here. Obviously, there's 2 more volumes of Reckless coming, which is fantastic. Are they 4 months apart? Is that right? The next one will be
the next one's April. The third one will probably be end of October or mid-November.
Okay.
The third one, the second one is end of April. We're going to the printer next month. Wow. On that one. It takes about 2 months-ish to print and get it distributed because of the hardbackness of it. But yeah, we're you know, 4 to 6 months between on the last 2. And then we'll probably take a little break and I have an idea for another graphic novel that we've been talking about for a couple of years, that now that we're doing graphic novels, it was one of those things that wouldn't have made sense serialized as single issue comics. But now that we're having some success with these graphic novels, I'm like, oh, maybe we'll do that. And it'll be a slightly longer book than the Reckless books are. But I'd love to, you know, have us do more Reckless books beyond the third one. This is the idea that back in those old days with those spinner rack, you know, paperback pulp novels series, like the Travis McGee books, the first 3 of them, I believe, were released like 2 months apart from each other. So over 6 months, they just let you get to know who this character was in these 3 adventures. And MacDonald had written all 3 books on spec just to see if he could write a series character because he wasn't sure he could. Mm-hmm. And so I read an interview with him about that, and I just thought, let's try and do that. We're fast. Yeah. That won't kill us. And now we're almost to the end of the second book, and I feel like maybe it will kill us.
I think, you know, we could easily do a Reckless book a year and something else.
Yeah, I love the character. Ideally, I would love to because the second book takes place in 1985, and then the third book I think is 1988. And then I would love to go all the way up to, because I mean, he's writing them from the present tense. So he's like a 70-year-old man now, because he's like 15, 16 years older than me. Right. But that was a big attraction to it too, was the idea of, because I read all these series books, and usually they're just kind of written present tense because they're going along and they're not period piece. You know, they're just whatever year they were written in is when it takes place. And I just thought it'd be interesting to do one where like the person writing it is sort of reflecting back on their life, and we're heading towards him having to deal with how do you continue to do this job as you get older? Because boy, that's something that I'm sure we're all thinking about right now. You know,
for sure.
I
think I can, safely speak for a lot of people that we would love to see you continue with this as long as you guys want to do them. If you could get 20 books out of this series, that sounds great. I love the way you two work together. I love the work that you produce, and this was a great book. So if you are at home, and you're looking for a book to read and you don't know what to do, here's a really, really good book. That despite it being, the work of a team that's worked together for a million years, is an original idea, self-contained in itself. I cannot recommend this anywhere near enough to you. I want to thank Ed and Sean for doing this book. I want to thank them for being guests today. And I want to say before we jump off that next month, our guest is the awesome Gilbert Hernandez with No Twist and Scarlet by Starlight as a flip book. Ooh, it's a flip book, and it's shiny. You can see, very cool. So we'll be talking to Gilbert next month, and then I can't announce it yet, but we've got the most amazing guest for April. Oh my God, I'm going to die.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, well, it's a good book and it's a good guest, so I'm really excited for that. So, again, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Sean, for taking the time to talk to us today.
Well, thanks for having us.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Two shot. There we go. And really, thank you guys for this book, and keep working together as long as it's been 20 years. Let's get another 20 or 30 more out of you guys if we can.
Yeah.
I agree.
I'm older than you two. I haven't got long left.
No, honestly, it's shops like yours and all these comic book stores. Like we do well in the book market now, but we still our majority of our readership is in comic stores, and it's guys like you behind the counter who are stocking these books and pushing them on people. Yeah. We had no idea when Pulp came out because it was just right after the pandemic shutdown. Like I just was like, oh well, we have no idea what this book is going to sell or whatever. And those days of hearing how many people were moving on those opening days, it was just like, holy crap! Like it made me feel so good about comic stores and comics, and just the idea that this career is not going to disappear for us, because I think we all have those moments for sure, and we're all still grappling with these moments of like, is the thing I love doing now going to be a thing I can't do? Yeah. Like, when I saw everybody rushing to Kickstarter, I was like, oh God, what's happening?
That's just a correction in one direction. It's going to correct back. This is the object in stores is where things have to be. No,
and this is the highest print run we've ever had on a hardback, right. And our initial orders were even though it was a more expensive book than Pulp, the initial orders were something like 30% higher, and then the advanced reorders the week before it came out was like that, and the Marvel crossover were the number, like the 1 and 2 things ordered in the entire direct market. That's like insane, the amount that stores have gotten behind this stuff. And I want other creators that have built enough of an audience to replicate this on some level, because I feel like Sean and I, a little bit of a canary in a coal mine. I don't think I wouldn't like you said, like a lot of comics needs that serialization and trade and to build those things. But we've been doing this for 20 years now, and I'm like, if there are people that can do it and want to do it, it's like, this I think proves in some ways that some people could bring their audience over with them to these full format books if that was what they wanted to do. And then you could have imagine if you had a store where a book like this was coming out every month or every 2 weeks by like a known team, and instead of selling a bunch of $4 comics and then not selling as many of the trades and hardbacks later, you were moving 100, 200, 300 hardbacks on these things.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that's how it works in the real world, but yes, I'm with you on the principle of that, and we're trying.
Yeah, the principle of it. It's always building towards.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't foresee a comics industry without monthly single issue comics personally. I still get them, every week. So.
I'll tell you where it's really growing. It's with the kids' graphic novels. That's where those kids are, and that's a market that is going to change everything for the next years. Anyway, thank you guys for being here. Thanks for doing the book. I want to thank Zoe and Kat for running the store. I want to thank Jordan for running the show. I want to thank The Beat over on that side for being the sponsor. I want to thank all the members of the Graphic Novel Club for letting us do this and keeping us going. Thank you all. We will see you next month. Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.